Some topics from the pre-Hispanic past are known only to a few, and the Flag of Cuitlahuac is one of them. Only a few people among those who practice the so-called Danza de la Mexicanidad have seen or heard of this symbol. And even among them, the information about it is scarce. But what is this flag? Did it really exist? Who discovered it? And is it true or fabrication? To answer these questions, let's first talk about its possible origin. Especially in social media, it's said that this flag, or pantle in Nahuatl, was used in the Battle of La Noche Triste, or the Night of Victory, depending on your perspective. It is said to have belonged to Cuitlahuac, the penultimate Mexica Tlatoani ruler, since, by the time of the battle, on June 30, 1520, Moctezuma Xocoyotzin had already died. It's plausible that there were banners or pantles at that time, even thought the battle happened unexpectedly. The Spanish and their allies were trying to flee to Tenochtitlan without being discovered, through the causeway now called Mexico-Tacuba, but somehow alerted the Mexica, and thus the confrontation began. However, we have no certainty about where Cuitlahuac actually was at that moment, let alone whether he had a flag. Some Spaniards managed to escape that night, later attempting to circle Lake Texcoco from the north in order to return to Tlaxcala. But in Otumba, historical records describe another battle, where despite the superior numbers of the Mexica and their allies, they failed to wipe out the survivors of La Noche Triste. This supposedly was due to a flag. The battle is said to have occurred on July 7, 1520. At that point, Cuitlahuac ordered his brother, the Xihuacoatl Matlatzincatzin, to continue the pursuit, while he stayed in Tenochtitlan to fight over remaining Spaniards who hadn't escaped, as well as other Mexican nobles, relatives of Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, who had supported the Spaniards. However, the turning point of the battle came when the pantle was captured. Top outnumbered, Cortés changed with his cavalry against the Xihuacoatl, killed him, and seized both of Feder Hadris and the Tlahuizmatlaxopili, the war standard of the Mexica. With that act, the Mexica army broke ranks and the Spaniards escaped. But was this captured object really Cuitlahuac's flag? The truth is, we can't say for sure. However, hundreds of years later, this design appeared. So who rebuilt it? And what was the basis of this supposed discovery? The person credited with discovering it was Ignacio Romero Vargas Iturbide. Now, this is it, and about whom very little information exists. In fact, this is one of the very few photos of him. In his lifetime, he wrote a few books related to pre-Hispanic cultures, often showing a clear preference for the classical socialist and communist ideals of 60s and 80s in Mexico. Let's not forget that many leftist figures of the time embraced such ideologies. Frida Kahlo, her returned husband, Diego Rivera, Gaydos, and others with their utopian communist dreams. In Romero Vargas' case, some of his books can still be purchased today. One of his goals was to restructure the Mexica political system by reinstating the pre-Hispanic Calpulli, albeit infused with modern communist touches. Unfortunately, most of what we know about him comes from himself. He is believed to have lived from 1910 to 1980. Born in Mexico City into a wealthy family, his paternal grandfather had roots in Puebla, and his mother came from a Michoacan family. He even claimed to be a descendant of Agustin de Iturbide, Mexico's first emperor. He studied law and later became a Catholic novice, eventually becoming a priest in 1941, serving in various places and outside Mexico. As for the discovery of Cuitlahuac's flag, we find ourselves in none other than the Vatican. Supposedly, he lived there for some time, but the stories are murky and unverifiable. Some claim he was the Pope's private secretary, and that this allowed him access to the Vatican's secret archives, where he discovered documents and artifacts from the pre-Hispanic era, including the flag featured in this video. Upon seeing it, he copied it, later left the priesthood and returned to Mexico, where he became involved in ideological movements, particularly in the old federal district, that hailed from what is now as the Mexicanidad movement or Danza de la Mexicanidad. However, his vision wasn't just for people or gather weekly in public square to dance and chant Únete. According to the popular version that circulates on social media, this is the man responsible for the flag's discovery. Now for the key question: it is true or false? Well, we'll try to present the available evidence and you can decide. First, if this pamphlet truly exists, Romeo Vargas Iturbide is the only person in Mexico who ever saw it. It does not appear in the official catalog of the Vatican Library, as you can see on their website. It has never been studied firsthand at the Vatican by an archaeologist, anthropologist, or historian. In other words, no other reproduction exists besides Romeo Vargas' design. His biography and what others say about him contain serious inconsistencies. For instance, to justify his stay at the Vatican and his access to the archives, many people casually claim he was the Pope's private secretary. But they don't specify which Pope he supposedly served, sometimes even saying he held the position between 1973 and 1975. Let's look at the facts. If we go with 1973 to 1975, the Pope at that time was Paul VI. Since 1963 to 1978. Others claim he served Pope John XXVIII since 1958 to 1963. So which Pope was it? Because if we look at the official list of each Pope's private secretaries, none of them were Mexican, let alone named Romeo Vargas. Lastly, two things not aligned with the pamphlet design at the Mexican worldview. First, that we said, Romeo Vargas claimed to be a descendant of Agustín de Iturbide. Coincidentally, both their flags share notable similarities, even with some of the oldest surviving Mexican flags, especially in the design of the eagle. And critically, we no longer have the original design Romeo Vargas supposedly drew, only later replicas that are said to be exact copies of the one from the Vatican. If the design never changed, it doesn't match authentic Mexican representations that have survived. Let's look at the Huehuetls from Malinalco and the ones in the National Museum of Anthropology. Or the eagle in the Codex Mendoza, all thoughts created under Spanish supervision. The eagle is depicted with great anatomical detail. There's also the sacred Teocalli of War, or the stone Cuauhxicalli. All of these show meticulous feathering claws, heads, beaks, and even the noble plants with horns and fruit. In contrast, the only piece that looks simplistic is this supposed pamphlet. even compared to surviving Chimali's shields, it falls short in detail. Yes, some will say that because the original is allegedly in the Vatican's secret archives, hardly anyone has seen it. But is that true? Or did Romeo Vargas invent the story to justify the birth of a movement? Because, of course, it's valid to create new things. This is our time, just as it was theirs 500 years ago. There's no issue with updating the past to bring into the present and project into the future. But when it comes to the supposed Flag of Cuitlahuac, we have only one testimony of its existence, unless the Vatican one that acknowledged that this object is real. Yes, it's possible there are things hidden and stored away. So hopefully one day we can verify the authenticity of this symbol for real. But for now, the scant evidence leaves us with more questions than answers, because if there's one thing we already have plenty of in our story, it's made up symbols. What do you think?